All you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company this morning. Woo, what a week it's been. The newspapers are absolutely cracking this morning. Can't wait to get into those. We've got Michael Gove coming on the show, Secretary of State for Levelling Up, frenemy of Boris Johnson, who sacked him on the day he announced his resignation as PM. Going to be speaking to him about all things Partygate, Boris and beyond. David Davis, former Brexit Secretary and Tory grandees, coming on to speak to me in the studio. I'm also going to be discussing the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon and all things Scottish with Anna Sarwar, who's the Scottish Labour leader. I'm going to be joined by Brendan Clark-Smith, one of the few Tories still backing Boris publicly, and Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary, is going to give me his exclusive reaction to Levi Belfield's prison marriage. Can you believe that prisoners like Levi Belfield, despicable, evil criminals, are even in a position to get married in prison? So I'll be discussing all that with him later. Fun-packed show, don't go anywhere. Stay with me and let's go through the front pages. So, the Sunday Times has got an exclusive interview with Prince William. I'll end homelessness, he says. This is about his plan to try and use the Duchy of Cornwall to house people in social housing. The Sunday Telegraph, Starmer aide Sue Gray broke civil service job rules. Going to be discussing that throughout the show. This is an exclusive by the Sunday Telegraph, which basically says that Simon Case and the top lawyer there found that she was in contravention of the rules for accepting that job with Keir Starmer. The Observer, just an ex-MP, Sunak's allies pour scorn on beaten Johnson, making the point that he is dead and buried in politics for now. The Mail on Sunday, proof Boris accuser did go to party in lockdown. This is about Bernard Jenkin. He's on that Privileges Committee. And whether or not the party he went to was a party or was for business reasons. Sun on Sunday, 3 lions Kyle in Wags bust-up. We won't be covering that story today, but that's the front page of the Sun on Sunday. Sunday Express. Now, this, I think, hits at the heart of all of these problems. We're going on about psychodramas in the Tory party. Who actually cares? As the Sunday Express says, get a grip and save economy. I mean, probably that should be the government's priority right now. And Sunday Mirror, lockdown video bombshell. The Partygate tapes. They've got footage of people partying in CCHQ. And who better to discuss that than the Sunday Mirror's former political editor, Nigel Nelson, GB News' senior political analyst, I think we call you these days,
Commentator.
Nigel. Commentator. Yeah. I quite like analyst because it makes it sound slightly Nasser-esque. Now, look, your old paper's got a great scoop here. They've managed to get this footage of inside this party, the offending party with staff of Sean Bailey, formerly a candidate for London Mayor, now a peer in the House of Lords because he was ennobled by Boris Johnson. And we're calling that leak one of the day. What's the reaction to it? I mean, it's pretty bloody damaging, isn't it?
It is. I mean, 24, there were at least 24 staffers there. We know that 2 of them got honours on the basis of that. That one was Ben Mallet, who was Sean Bailey's campaign chief.
Yeah.
He got an OBE. He's in the video. In fact, Sean Bailey, who got a peerage, had left before the video was taken.
Let's have a look at it, Nigel, because we have got it here.
It's party.
It's also an ad and also Instagram Live. As long as we don't scream it away. Well, I'm pretty sure impressive, I've got to say. Laura?
What do you think of this?
Laura?
Well, that's all very jolly, isn't it, Nigel?
Well, jolly, and I think drink's been taken by the look of it, doesn't it?
And social distancing out the window, seemingly. So, look, it's very damaging. Do we think that there should now be further police involvement? Where do we take Partygate? Do we take it further? Do people care on the doorstep?
Well, I mean, bear in mind this was investigated first time round and the police didn't find a breach of the rules.
Yeah.
Now, quite clearly, when you look at that video, that's evidence that they didn't have at the time. All they had was a picture of all of them together. The question, obviously, is it in the public interest for the police to waste an awful lot more time on dealing with Partygate matters?
What do you think?
Well, I mean, they did it with Keir Starmer because Keir Starmer was... they had one investigation over Beergate, they had a second investigation after complaints, and he was cleared of that. I think my general view is that now we're so far away from the event that probably the police time involved is best to leave it alone.
Yeah. And also, I suppose, with the crime rate not exactly looking particularly clever, people might want them to investigate their burglaries and mobile phone muggings rather than this. Let's look at leak 2 of the day, as we're calling it. Telegraph splash.
Lots of leaks.
There's leaks all over there. I tell you what, it's like St David's Day all over again. Report by the Cabinet Office finds Sue Gray broke impartiality rules. Well, this is interesting. Sunday Telegraph has obviously got hold of the report into Sue Gray going from being this top civil servant to becoming Chief of Staff for Keir Starmer. Does this now mean that the Labour leader has to stop this appointment, do you think, Nigel?
No, I don't think he needs to do that. I mean, the issue here is that certainly Sue Gray was Miss Propriety. That was her job, that everyone was in fear of her in Whitehall because she was such a stickler for the rules.
Yes.
And certainly the fact that she would appear... I mean, the report is not actually totally conclusive on this, according to the Telegraph, but it seems to be that she broke the rules.
So Miss Impropriety now?
Yeah, I think so. And on the basis that, that she was in breach of the Civil Service Code simply by not declaring the fact she was talking to the opposition.
Is this a spectacular own goal for Keir Starmer? I mean, he could have chosen somebody who wouldn't have been facing this scrutiny. Sue Gray's become a household name.
Well,
like the most famous civil service servant of recent times.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that she'll do a good job as his Chief of Staff, so I don't see a problem there.
But it does call into question her analysis of the events around Partygate, her report on Boris Johnson.
I'm not sure it does, really, because her meetings with Keir Starmer happened after she'd done the report.
Yes.
So I don't think it's a bit like the privileges inquiry. I don't think there is actually any question of bias or inaccuracy in her original report.
I don't get this, because people who criticise this show say, oh, you can't leave your biases at the door, everyone's biased. We know that everybody has opinions. It's the same with the Harriet Harman situation. I know we disagree on this. She tweets that she thinks Boris Johnson has misled Parliament before she is chairing an investigation into whether he misled Parliament. She should have recused herself. Sue Gray should have said, I can't accept this job because it's going to make me look as if I wasn't impartial as a civil servant. And actually, both conclusions aren't difficult to jump to.
No, I can see you can make that criticism, but the point basically is, on both the things that you're mentioning, look at the privileges report. If anyone can actually wade through 108 pages and 30,000 words, I think that they would conclude that any group of MPs would have reached the same conclusion that the privileges report did.
Let's talk about one of those MPs, Bernard Jenkin, who's on the Privileges Committee. Now, we've got an invitation that's been publicised on the Mail on Sunday. Eleanor Lang said that this event that took place, that Bernard Jenkin was at, was a business meeting in the vein of how Boris Johnson's explained some of his meetings with cake. It now emerges that Bernard Jenkins' wife Anne, who's also an MP, actually sent out an invite calling it a birthday party.
Yes, she did. And what it said was that she was having birthday drinks and she was holding it for a few of her favourite people.
So should Bernard Jenkins be investigated by police?
Well, I mean, in this case, in the same way as the Sean Bailey party, this happened roughly the same time. Meetings indoors were banned. So again, this would be a matter for the police. The question comes down to, in the same way, is it in the public interest now to get to look back?
I mean, I
this?
get that it's in Boris Johnson's interest to investigate Bernard Jenkins. I mean, he's called him a giant hypocrite, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Boris Johnson, the cheerleaders, are using Harriet Harman and Bernard Jenkins as kind of displacement activity
but then
for the report.
This is my argument then. If there was going to be displacement activity and the report was going to be called into question, Harman should have recused herself to avoid those criticisms. And Bernard Jenkins, if he's been at birthday parties in December 2020, isn't really in a position to comment on Partygate. What are either of those two doing on the committee?
I don't think Harriet Harman needed to recuse herself. On Bernard Jenkins, I think perhaps he did.
Yeah, all right. Let's move into two interviews that have caught our eye. The first of them is in the Mail on Sunday, David Warburton. Now, just give us a bit of context to why he's now standing down as a Tory MP, Nigel.
He also is complaining about the inquiries into him. It seems to be
Kafkaesque.
Yeah, it seems to be a bit of a fashion at the moment. What this is, he was caught taking cocaine, and there are allegations that he was harassing women.
People might remember this story because at the time his justification for taking the cocaine was that it wasn't cocaine. He actually had a habit of gathering dandruff in lines.
Which is a worse admission.
My goodness. But anyway, and it's going to spark a by-election.
Yes.
So let's put it this way to simplify, Nigel, because as ever, time is running away with us. There are 4 by-elections now. Can you give us your predictions on all 4 of them? Yeah,
I think that in David Warburton's seat, Somerton and Frome, 19,000 majority, captured from the Lib Dems, now a Lib Dem target, probably get it.
Yeah.
Uxbridge, I think, will go to Labour.
Yeah.
I think absolutely. Selby, not sure.
Nigel Adams' seat.
Yeah, that could go either way. The Tories
could keep that.
The Tories could hold that. When Mid-Beds finally comes up, probably go to Lib Dems.
So it's not going to be a great time for the Tories, whatever happens, it sounds. Very quickly, because you were interested in William talking to the Sunday Times about homelessness. I mean, you could ask the question, royals are meant to be politically impartial. Is homelessness sort of bordering on politics? Is he right to do this, Nigel?
I don't think so. It's actually helping young people. That William is saying, look, he's seen an awful lot of young people sofa surfing, wants to give them some kind of home, some social housing on his Duchy of Cornwall estate. That seems fine. His father spent a lot of time with the Prince's Trust helping young people. That is not political. It doesn't cross the line.
No, and also, actually, the criticism is you've got too many homes and you're not putting them to good use. So this is a progressive decision by a younger one. Nigel Nelson, thank you as ever for joining me this morning for what has been a stellar crop of papers. Buy a paper, people. That's what we do here. Now, the People's Panel, as ever, goes around the country canvassing your views on the stories of the week. And Ellie Costello is doing the People's Panel for the first time, and she's in Leighton Buzzard. Ellie, what questions have the panellists got for our guests today?
Well, good morning to you, Camilla. It's great to be with you for the People's Panel for the first time in Leighton Buzzard. It's the market town in Bedfordshire, and it is beautiful. It's been my first time here. We're at the Citadina coffee shop for the People's Panel today, and I'm joined now by the manager, Maria. Maria, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good, good. And how is business in Leighton Buzzard?
It's good. It could be better, but I think people still can afford to buy the coffee and cakes because I refuse to put the price up since difficulties after COVID.
And that's difficult for you, isn't it, personally, and not putting up those prices? But for you, the business is the priority, isn't it?
Of course, it was hard because I had to raise up my my staff wage. But I like people to be able to buy still coffee and cakes and enjoy it.
And it has been busy this morning, so it's paying off for you. And I've had a wonderful cake and coffee with you. Let's head inside, shall we? Well, Camilla, I've got a right treat for you today. This is your People's Panel. This is Michelle, this is Pat, and this is James. They've got lots of questions on the topics that are going to be raised in your show today with the politicians that are your guests. So, Michelle, what are you hoping to hear from the politicians this morning?
I mean, it's all the Partygate and the long inquiry into that. There was many other politicians that have been pictured at different parties and events. Why aren't they also being taken to task? You've got the main accuser, Sir Bernard Jenkins, is now at his own party for his wife. There's more important things going on in this country with the cost of living and everything else. They need to be held accountable, but they need to draw a line and move on and deal with the country. It's a distraction to what they should be doing.
OK, you say we need to move on, but looking at the newspapers today, the front pages, many of them have that new video of Tory staff members appearing to be laughing at them bending the rules. Do you not think people care about that?
They do care about bending the rules. People lost family members during COVID, and, you know, they're angry about that. You know, they're very angry about that. But, you know, where does it stop? You know, where does it stop from, you know, these long inquiries and everything else? The MPs need to be held, all of them, not just Boris, all of them need to be held accountable for their actions and their breaches of COVID rules. But they also need to be dealing with what's happening in the country right now. And that all this is a distraction to what they should be doing and, you know, dealing with.
OK, so much more important topics. And you almost want to see the spotlight off Boris and on the others. So, Pat, what do you want to hear from politicians today?
Well, illegal migrants with no identity, they should be held in secure locations. Why is this not happening? And also our green belt. If the Tories are serious about protecting our green belt, and please add open spaces to this, are they going to legislate for that to happen?
So illegal migration, there's been a lot of controversy about where to house migrants. There's migrant hotels often in the headlines, barges, perhaps even army bases. What are your thoughts?
It's got to be army bases where there's a security fence that surrounds those army bases. We've got to protect our citizens, and we're not doing it at the moment.
It's a safety issue for you, isn't it? You're concerned about the security of local communities. Would you like to see something like what happens in the US, where if somebody has a criminal record, they're simply not allowed in the country?
Definitely. That should have happened in the first place. I don't know what this country is playing at, but we're certainly letting the world in with no consequences.
OK. And you also want to touch upon housing, and I know, James, that's something that you feel very, very passionate about as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Ellie. Yeah, we've got a situation where central government and local government simply bat the housing crisis backwards and forwards, passing the blame from one to the other, and actually nothing gets done. Lots and lots of fine words about helping people to get mortgages, helping people with rental problems, helping local authorities build houses, and nothing happens. So, you know, the crazy thing is that this is a crisis that could be solved within months.
I mean, touching upon mortgage rates, there's some of the headlines yesterday that £3,000 could be added on to people's annual mortgage bills. I mean, it's a huge issue, isn't it? You've got another issue that you feel very passionate about that you'd like to hear from politicians.
I have, yes, and it's one that politicians seem to find real problems answering in Scotland and England, and that is a very simple question, which is, could Camilla's guest answer the question, what is a woman?
And that's so interesting, because that's the first time I've actually heard that from a member of the British public. You think that's something in the media are obsessed with, perhaps Westminster's obsessed with. But you're saying you think there should be a straight answer from politicians.
I think so.
You want to hear that?
I do, absolutely. And I think there is now so much, I've become very conscious of the pressure that the government is under and the opposition is under from some very small, very vociferous pressure groups who are, pushing an agenda. So, I would like to hear a straight answer to that question. That would be good.
OK, well, Camilla, so many topics here. Questions for the politicians. Lots to come from the People's Panel. We're going to be listening in very closely across the show. Back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Ellie. And don't forget, if you want to go to apply for the People's Panel, you can go to gbnews.com/panel. and will be coming up somewhere else in the UK next week. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Gove, Secretary of State for Levelling Up, the Tory MP for Surrey Heath. Boris Johnson's frenemy, I've got written down here, Mr Gove. Now, first of all, I know you've made this announcement today. Thank you for joining me this morning. You've introduced measures that are going to stop public bodies from imposing their own boycott or divestment campaigns against all foreign countries. You're talking about public bodies. Could this be extended to private firms too?
No, we're very clear that when it comes to foreign policy, the UK is stronger when we all speak with one voice. And at a time when we have war raging on the European continent, it's critically important that our Prime Minister, our Foreign Secretary, our country are united. So we don't want to have public bodies, local authorities, running their own rival foreign policy at a time like this. And the situation arises particularly because there are some councils, some local authorities that have subscribed to campaigns which are targeted against Israel and which have led to an upsurge because of the way in which they're targeted at the only Jewish state in tensions towards our own Jewish citizens.
Domestic matters. Have you seen this Sunday Mirror video of the people partying at CCHQ circa December 2020? Yes, I have, and I just wanted to say to GBNews viewers that I'm personally sorry that people behaved in this way. This video shows people behaving in a completely unacceptable way. The party that occurred was known about because I think there was a picture, a photograph that was taken of the event, and investigations had taken place previously, though I don't think that this video had actually been circulated before today. I mean, there's been partying at Downing Street, and you look at the date. I initially thought maybe it's December 2021. No, it's December 2020, so it's when the rest of us were all confined to our homes, having a miserable turkey dinner on Christmas. But you've got parties at Downing Street, parties at CCHQ. You were one of the most vociferous proponents of draconian COVID rules, and yet your own people couldn't follow them. It's an absolute disgrace, isn't it?
Well, it's a great pity that people behaved in this way. You're absolutely right, particularly, as you quite rightly point out, when there was a significant curtailment of people's liberty. The reason why those steps were taken was to reduce the spread of the disease in order to make sure that the pressures on the NHS were manageable, in order to make sure that we could treat people who were very ill. So, again, the actions here are deeply distressing, and I can only apologise to people that individuals behaved in this way. My understanding is that there was an investigation into the party when the photograph emerged, and people were disciplined.
Is that enough? Do you think the police should further investigate this and, indeed, your Conservative colleague Bernard Jenkin? We now find out from the Mail on Sunday that Mr Jenkin did attend a birthday drinks when the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons had described it as a business meeting. So you've also got people who are on the Privileges Committee looking into the conduct of Boris Johnson, having themselves potentially flouted some of the COVID rules. What are the Tories playing at here, Mr Gove?
So I missed the very end of your question there, Camilla. You said, what are
the Tories playing at? Bernard Jenkin now revealed to be at a party around the COVID rules.
Well, again, I don't know the details. I've seen some of the allegations. But I think your earlier point, which is a very fair one, is should the police investigate? And again, my view, I'm very old-fashioned in this regard, is that judgments about what crimes should and should not be investigated should be made by the police themselves. And it's a bad thing if politicians tell the police that they should investigate this crime and not that crime. I'm sure they will look at whatever evidence is presented and then make a judgment about what the right course of action is.
There's been a debate around whether Harriet Harman should have recused herself as chairwoman of that committee because of her previous comments about Boris Johnson and whether he knowingly misled the House. We now hear that Sue Gray broke civil service impartiality rules by opting to become Keir Starmer's chief of staff. Do you think the Labour leader should now block that appointment? I know you know Sue Gray quite well.
I do. I worked with Sue Gray. She was a civil servant who worked in the Department for Levelling Up. I think that Keir Starmer has an obligation of candour to let us know what it was that he did. It would appear, on the basis of what we know, that it was Keir Starmer who initiated these contacts. It was Keir Starmer who hasn't been completely candid about what he did. But as for Sue herself, I shan't criticise Sue, because I know that in all the time that I worked with her, she was a committed public servant.
But do you think it's wise for Keir Starmer to continue with this appointment?
Well, again, it's a matter for him. I mean, I think what we need to know is the precise sequence of events with Keir Starmer fessing up to what he did. I think on the basis of what we know, Keir Starmer, who professes to be a stickler for the rules, at the very least bent them. But again, in the case of the ultimate appointment, there are processes here, and I understand that those rules which determine whether or not this appointment can be taken up are being observed. But again, it's for Keir Starmer to answer.
David Warburton's decision to stand down from Somerset and Frome, that's going to spark another by-election. So we've now got 4 by-elections facing Rishi Sunak. He was brought in to steady the ship, but the ship's sinking, isn't it, Mr Gove?
No, we have 4 by-elections, and in those 4 by-elections, I'm confident that the Conservative message will prevail.
Are you confident you're going to win them, though?
In all of those 4 by-elections. Yes, what matters in those 4 by-elections are the 5 priorities that the Prime Minister has set out. We are the party that's committed, we are the government that is committed to halving inflation, to making sure that we reduce debt, that we grow the economy, that we cut NHS waiting lists, and also that we stop the boats. And
but you're probably going to lose all of those by-elections.
By-election or general election, the most important thing is the government delivering for you, and it's on that basis that I think that judgments will be made.
So are you confident of, are you saying seriously that you're confident of winning all 4 by-elections, including Uxbridge and South Ruislip?
They're all challenging, of course. No one would deny that any incumbent government, when it faces by-elections, will have a challenging time. But we have good candidates, and I believe that more importantly, we have the right message as a government, and on that basis, I'm looking forward to going out there, seeking to persuade every single person whom I talk to of the vital importance of keeping faith with a government that is determined to tackle the biggest challenge that we face at the moment, which is reducing inflation, and a government that is also laser-focused on improving our NHS and dealing with illegal migration. And the choice, of course, in the by-elections will be between us and Labour, as I pointed out earlier. Keir Starmer has significant questions to answer with regard to his adherence to the rules, but he also has bigger questions to answer with regard to his reckless commitment to borrow money in a way that would send the markets haywire.
All right, it's not a party political broadcast, although I do appreciate that support for your own party's policies. Let's just talk about Boris Johnson. Back in 2016, you said he was not fit to be PM. Then recently you described him as a man of integrity. You said that he put the country first. As PM, he did a very good job. So were you right in 2016 or are you right now?
Well, I think the truth is that, as I remarked earlier this week, Boris made mistakes. We're all prone to, at times, making mistakes. I've made mistakes. But Boris also was someone who, as Prime Minister, delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe. He was the staunchest defender of Ukraine in the Western world. And Boris also, as we both know, after the parliamentary impasse that meant that the will of the people in that referendum had been frustrated, he was the person who got Brexit done. So I think that in weighing up Boris's contribution to public life, you need to both acknowledge the good as well as acknowledging the frailties. And that is I think the sort of rounded judgment that all of us would wish to have made about our own contribution.
I'm intrigued to know, because it came up in Anthony Selden's recent book that he thought that all roads to Boris's demise, and indeed perhaps even the Conservative Party's demise in 2024, leads back to that moment where you knifed him in 2016. So do you regret that now?
I think it's well known that at the time I felt that Boris was not the right person to be Prime Minister. I think it's wrong to look at any single event and say that that single event is the cause of multiple different branching histories. So people will form their own judgment about Boris. I've given you mine, and I hope that people will appreciate that it is a judgment that combines admiration for his great qualities with also an acknowledgement of some frailties and weaknesses.
A politician's answer, if ever I heard one. But Michael Gove, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Lovely to speak to you.
Camilla, it's always a pleasure. Thank you. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, just after the break, I'm going to be speaking to Tory grandee David Davis about all things Boris Johnson and the Privileges Committee. And we've managed to track down a Tory MP who's still supportive of Boris Johnson. Brendan Clark-Smith will give me his take. We'll also be hearing from the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar live from Glasgow. Don't go anywhere.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We've got lots more to come on today's Camilla Tominey show. In just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to Brexit big beast David Davis. We're also going to be hearing from one of the few Tory MPs still to be publicly backing Boris Johnson. That's Brendan Clark-Smith. And we're going to get a former Justice Secretary's reaction to the news that Sikh serial killer Levi Belfield, would you believe, is getting married in prison. It's unbelievable. All that after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10 here in the GB newsroom. Footage has emerged appearing to show Conservative Party staff dancing and joking about COVID restrictions during the height of the pandemic. In the video obtained by The Mirror, one partygoer can be heard discussing bending the rules and laughing, while another pair dance and crash into a table covered in food and wine glasses. It's understood at least 24 people attended the Christmas party held at Conservative Party headquarters when indoor socialising was banned. 2 of those at the party were named in Boris Johnson's resignation honours list. The Conservatives say disciplinary action has already been taken. Rishi Sunak is facing a 4th by-election following the resignation of a former Tory MP. David Warburton, who had the Tory whip suspended last April, has stepped down from his Somerton and Frome seat following allegations of sexual misconduct and cocaine use. He's the 4th Tory MP in 8 days to resign, following announcements by Boris Johnson, Nigel Adams and Nadine Dorries. Teachers in England will hold fresh strikes next month in their long-running dispute over pay. The National Education Union has announced walkouts on Wednesday the 5th and Friday the 7th of July. The NEU is also reballoting its members to see if they want to continue taking industrial action for the rest of the year. If you've been getting used to the nice warm weather, well, today might put a bit of a dampener on it. There's thunder, lightning and heavy rain forecast. The Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning for thunderstorms across the majority of England and Wales. That lasts until midnight. Heavy showers are expected to bring as much as 8 centimetres of rain within 3 hours in the worst affected regions. The warm temperatures will continue today, though, staying around the mid-20s. Prince William's vowed to tackle homelessness by building social housing on his own land. The Prince of Wales told The Times that ending the plight of hidden homelessness in the UK has been a lifelong ambition. He's expressed frustration at government, councils and charities who he believes manage homelessness rather than preventing it. Many of the details of the 5-year plan will be announced next month. And Kensington Palace has released a new photo of Prince William and his children to mark Father's Day. Charlotte and George are either side of their dad, and the youngest, Louis, is giving him a hug from behind. All are smiling. The picture was taken on the Windsor estate earlier this year. TV Online, DAB and TuneIn Radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Camilla.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey show. I'm going to be speaking to David Davis in just a minute. The former Brexit Secretary is by my side in the studio. I'm also going to be joined by Anna Sarwar, Scottish Labour leader. We'll be asking him about Nicola Sturgeon's questioning by police for 7 hours in the week. And Brendan Clark-Smith, who's one of the few Tory MPs still to be publicly backing Boris, will join me, along with Robert Buckland, to talk about that astonishing story about Levi Belfield getting married in prison. But first of all, let's bring David Davis into the conversation. Lovely to see you on this Sunday morning. Now, the newspapers don't make for great reading for the Conservative Party. We've got the Sunday Mirror exposed...
I picked a great morning to come on.
I tell you what, yeah, great. The Sunday Mirror's exposed these people partying at CCHQ in December 2020. We've got Bernard Jenkin seemingly having gone to a birthday party around the same time when the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, Eleanor Lang, referred to it as a business meeting, not in anyone's minds who are watching GB News or listening to the radio. We've got James Warburton now having stood down from Somerset and Frome. That's a 4th by-election for steadying the ship Rishi Sunak. I put it to Michael Gove earlier, and I'll put it to you. The ship's sinking, isn't it? Interest rates at 6%. You were a minister in 97. I think you were Europe minister back then. Yeah. Are we seeing 1997 all over again?
No,
David?
I don't think we are. I mean, it's pretty stormy. I mean, as you say, steadying.
Crikey! That's one way of putting it.
It's going to test Rishi's nautical skills, shall we say? But it's pretty stormy. But no, it's manageable. Look, I came into Parliament in '87, 1 year after Margaret Thatcher lost Rydale. Spectacular loss, and it went from 20-odd thousand majority to, I think, minus 6,000 or something.
Yes.
And then the very next year we got it back again, you know, and we got returned. So I wouldn't worry too much about the by-elections. They'll be embarrassing, difficult, they'll cause problems with momentum.
Do you think you'll win any of them?
Oh, I don't know. It's very hard to tell. It depends if they all happen at the same time or not. Because I mean, even the day we lost Rydale, we hung on to a Derbyshire one.
Yes.
And then they're both safe seats. So it's very hard to tell. I don't think they indicate much, really. They're sort of demonstrator battlefields, but they're not real predictors of outcomes. They never have been.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the
but
news,
your
as you say,
chances
is
in
very,
2024
very poor.
are looking bad. You've got a very slim chance of pulling this back.
I think we have a modest chance. I wouldn't say it's a majority. I'd say it's probably a 2/3 chance of us not winning, half of it Labour winning, half of it no overall control, a hung Parliament, and us perhaps with a third chance
But
of
what
winning.
do you blame that on? Because I know you were one of the first to call Boris Johnson to go. You know, you can blame Boris Johnson. Lots of people watching and listening to this will be blaming the lack of conservatism in the Conservative Party, which must frustrate somebody like you.
Well, it does. But, I mean, the first thing you got to be careful not to forget is the turmoil we're already in, the sort of objective turmoil, whether it's the COVID, whether it's the Ukraine war, whether it's the run-up of international interest rates, all those things together.
But Rishi Sunak's meant to steady this ship in very choppy waters, and we're now looking at interest rates of 6%. You know, there's a big focus on how it affects the household finances. You're a former businessman. How does it affect businesses, David? We're going to be seeing foreclosures on people's homes, and we're going to be seeing businesses fold, because there's no way... I mean, the government's expressed surprise this week that there's wage inflation. Well, the government put the minimum wage up by 9.2%. Some of this is idiotic. You know, the corporation tax increase. Corporation tax increase on what profits?
Well, I mean... be careful, because corporation tax with super deductions and so on, it's not necessarily quite as clear as it looks. But you're right, I'm a low-tax Tory. I would prefer a lower tax strategy. I want to see, I'm hoping this autumn, we're going to have an autumn budget and the beginnings of a reduction in taxes. But your point about steadying the ship, we need Rishi more now than ever because of all that turbulence.
Globalist, technocratical Rishi, who may be taken hostage by the Treasury?
No, I don't think so. I think he's the last person to be taken hostage by the Treasury. He's one person who can actually argue with them and stand up to them.
OK, well, let's use an example. There's a story in the paper about people wanting to go against this idea of being in this band of countries that are in this minimum corporation tax ban. They think it's anti-growth, that we shouldn't be aligning ourselves with people with historically high corporation tax rates. The whole point of Brexit was that we went alone. And that we're more Singaporean, and that hasn't happened.
Well, to be honest, I have some sympathy with them, but it's not as simple as it sounds, because I think the idea was to have a minimum corporation tax of 15%. Well, one of the effects of that would be to bring Luxembourg, Ireland, the Netherlands, and other countries, and indeed some of our independent territories, into the same box that we're in, because we lose quite a lot of trade to Ireland, for example, because it has a lower. So it would equalise that. So it's not quite as simple as it looks, but I do actually believe that in the long term, corporation tax rate competition is good for the world at large. So I think...
but you'd rather our tax rate was lower, right?
I'd rather the tax rate was lower. Of course I would.
Do you agree with Mark?
But not by borrowing to do it, which was the Liz Truss effect.
What's your reaction to Mark Carney again having a go at Brexit and blaming Brexit for high inflation?
Well, I've been laughing out loud this week. What with Mark Carney and the KC at the COVID thing, saying
COVID's Brexit's fault.
It's just madness. And what you're seeing is, I think what the social psychologists call confirmatory bias. People who want to believe Brexit's a terrible thing look round and pick. Oh, that went wrong. That's Brexit. They don't look and see that our service exports have gone up by the highest in the G7, the highest in Europe, and pretty much the highest in the world. That we've got high employment levels and so on and so on.
So how much of it inflationary measures particularly are the Bank of England's fault?
I
mean,
think-
including Mark Carney. He's the one who presided
Well,
over...
I think historically there's no doubt that what every country in the world went in for, quantitative easing, has been a feeder to core inflation. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And there were reasons for it at the time. You know, just as during COVID we had to spend money that we didn't have, bluntly, to keep things going, we're now having to pay the price of that. So, yeah, the banks had a role in this. You know, frankly, I would have had a different bank governor years back, you know.
But are you disappointed with how Brexit's worked out?
No,
Do you think the government's done enough to maximise the opportunity?
Not yet. No, it hasn't. No, those are two different questions.
OK, answer both.
Answer to one, no, because this is only the second year, really, in the midst of crises galore on a global scale. Has the government done enough? No, it hasn't. Indeed, I think the government missed some chances during the COVID period when it could have been planning things and it wasn't really working hard enough. But also, listen, I resigned because I thought the original strategy was wrong.
Yeah.
And that meant we had to talking about turning ocean liners, we had to pull the whole ocean liner back. And to be fair to Boris, he did start that process. So it hasn't been done as well as it should be. Has it failed? Certainly not, no. I mean, as I say, some of the economic numbers that people don't say to you on our overall growth rate, better than Europe, on service levels, which is the biggest part, 80% of the economy, we're doing really, really well.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things we're doing well. And of course, whether it's vaccines or Ukraine, our independence has actually worked both to our advantage and to the world's advantage.
Although still the news agenda is dominated by all things blonde and Boris-ish. How are you going to vote tomorrow?
If there's a vote, I will vote to support the committee. And the reason for that is I've actually read the report.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 30,000 words.
Are you confident that Harriet Harman was a neutral arbiter in all this, having tweeted that she thought Boris misled Parliament?
Let's understand something about this. I mean, people like Rees-Mogg argue very strongly about the importance of Parliament. Boris argues about it. And one of the things about Parliament is it's the highest court in the land.
Yeah.
That creates a problem when you're coming to privileges. What's that problem? It's like having a trial in a village. Everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
Nobody is entirely unbiased, anybody in the whole thing. And this was true with Boris too. I mean, people took views on either side of the divide. Now, what's important about this report, and I recommend to your viewers, if they really care about this, actually read it.
Yeah.
Because what they do is they take 6 cases. They say to Boris, the last 16, the ones involving checkers and so on, they just take Boris's word for it.
Yeah.
They take 6 cases, and 5 of which he was actually at the parties, and go through them piece by piece and say, did he know about this? Did he know about them? Did he attend
But he's
them?
arguing, how do they know his own mind at the time?
They don't have to. What they know is what he knows.
Yeah.
If you go to a party, you know it was a party. You don't need an advisor to tell you. And if your viewers don't have time to read the whole thing, just read about the 8 paragraphs from 109 onwards.
Yeah, okay.
And they'll see what I mean.
Do what journalists do. Just read the conclusion.
Well, it's not the conclusion, because in the conclusion they say, look at paragraph this for that, look at paragraph that. It's a very, very carefully argued report. So, in a way, that
Having
means
said that,
almost
though,
independent.
David, this is slightly contradictory, because I remember having conversations with you about the process that Owen Paterson faced, and there's been criticisms. David Warburton said today that standards process is Kafkaesque, and you were concerned about it. So MPs investigating MPs doesn't always work out that way.
The irony, well, of course, Paterson wasn't a full privileges committee. It was a standards.
Yes, so it had some lay people as well.
And I actually went to see Boris in spring of 2021 and said, Boris, you need to fix this system.
And
he didn't.
Right.
He didn't.
So
because it was somebody else involved. It wasn't him involved. He didn't do anything about it.
One more question about a system that could be fixed.
Yeah.
Resignation honours. Honours in general, David. I mean, the ennobling and indeed the awarding of awards to people. I mean, 2 of them have been caught out in the CCHQ video, Ben Mallet and Sean Bailey.
Skin crawl.
Who's this Charlotte Owen, who was a secretary to Boris for about 5 minutes and is now a member of the House of Lords?
I think they call them executive assistants.
Something like that. What's going on? Should we just scrap resignation honours?
I don't know. No, I don't think so. I mean, look, what's the point of a resignation honour? I mean, it sounds like an anachronism. What it is normally is prime ministers at the end of their time in office rewarding a few people, notably a few people who have been
so
above...
cap on numbers.
Above, maybe. That may be a good idea.
Maybe 3.
Maybe a good idea.
5.
A dozen, maybe, but, you know...
A dozen?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, how many people work in number 10? 400, believe it or not, now. But, you know, but the point being, it allows them to reward people who've acted above and beyond in the public interest. But this dates from the days, as it were, when politicians were gentlemen.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's
That's
not...
no longer the case, David.
Well, you must draw... Your viewers must draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, will you get knighted at some point?
I don't think so.
Not by Boris Johnson, but maybe you've supported Rishi Sunak.
No, it doesn't. Well, let me put it this way. I haven't rushed to be knighted or rushed to accept any offers.
Right. Well, thank you very much, not Sir David Davis. Thank you for joining me in the studio this morning. Always lovely to see you. Thank you. Now, we're going to go from David Davis, who I keep on describing as a frenemy. No, not even a frenemy of Boris Johnson, just an enemy. I described Michael Gove as a frenemy.
I'm a critic of Boris
You're
Johnson.
a critic of Boris Johnson, yeah. No, it's Michael Gove that's a frenemy. And let's now go to a supporter of Boris Johnson, Brendan Clark-Smith, Tory MP for Bassett Law. He served as a minister under Johnson. Now, Brendan, I'm going to just read this polling from JL Partners to you, because I just think it sort of sums it up today. It was in the Sunday Times, forgive me, but let me read it. It says, the Red Wall prefers Rishi Sunak to Boris Johnson by 20 points. It says Boris Johnson is less popular with the British public than Philip Schofield and Xi Jinping. It further says, and I quote, this is from Jamie Johnson, no relation, obviously, if Conservative MPs want any chance of winning their seats, they will need to stop peddling the Boris fantasy and move on. Brendan, you've got to move on.
Well, Camilla, I think this takes me back to my childhood and watching the original House of Cards and talking about opinion polling, and they say they can say in an opinion poll whatever you want them to say, really. We've got to be very careful not to just look at one poll. I think when we're looking at how parties are doing generally, we never pay attention to just one poll. That's all they are. Of course, they were very wrong in the general election. They were very wrong in the referendum. But of course, yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking at what they say. But Boris Johnson still enjoys a lot of support where I am. Please, the poll said that Rishi Sunak's popular in the Red Wall. That's nice to hear. But I would take it with a pinch of salt, though.
I mean, your seat was held by Labour between the Great Depression and 2019. Obviously, you won this historic victory in 2019. But be honest with me, Brendan, how concerned are you that you're going to lose Bassett Law in 2024?
Well, I think there's no such thing as a safe seat. And I think when you have that attitude, that's how you do lose seats. You have to work hard. You have to work hard in your incumbency, and you should never take voters for granted. And that's part of the reason people like me got elected, because Labour were taking people for granted in these seats. We've got at least 4 by-elections coming up now. The same thing, you know, they will look at whether they think the Member of Parliament's done a good job. Some of it's going to be a reflection on things at the moment. But at the same time, it shows why working hard in your constituency is so important, really. Now, I've tried to focus on local issues here. I've tried to be a good MP, and I would hope that I'd be rewarded with that. But of course, that's not doubting it's a very difficult time for us, and we should take nothing for granted.
And on Boris Johnson, I mean, do you not accept now, after everything that's happened, and obviously he started his new column in the Mail, so he seems to have moved on, that he's politically dead and buried right now, Brendan? You've got to move on, haven't you? All of the supporters of Boris Johnson have got to move on for the sake of party unity.
Well, I think a lot of us have moved on a long time ago, but what we don't want to see is one of our colleagues thrown under the bus and treated very poorly. And I think that's what this is really about, Camilla. It's not about Boris making some big comeback or anything like that. It's about someone being able to leave office with dignity. And we think that he's been subjected to what's a very, very unfair committee there. I think the conclusions at the end seem very spiteful and vindictive. Not just the 90 days, but taking his pass off him as well, which is unprecedented for a former prime minister, really. We just want to see the right thing done by him, as I would with any colleague. And of course, if someone was on the other benches and treated this way, I'd be saying the same thing.
Although we hear that Boris Johnson doesn't necessarily want his supporters, yourself included, to call for a vote tomorrow if there isn't going to be a vote, because he's worried he won't get the numbers. How would you vote?
Well, Boris is keen to move on. I mean, I've been quite vocal about this, saying that I refuse to vote for this report and I would vote against it. Part of me wants to do that. I think it's such a appalling set of sanctions, and I have doubts about how the report came to its conclusions in the first place, about chairmanship issues and about all sorts of other things. So part of me actually wants to see people walk through those lobbies, justify it to their constituents, justify it to their members why they voted the way they did. Now, if there's not going to be a vote, I mean, the problem is the opposition are going to probably whip for it, even though it's a House matter. So the numbers will be high there. And of course, then you'll have people saying, oh, they only got 40 or 50 people voting for it, of course, while the rest are out campaigning in by-elections because
40 or 50?
It's a one-line whip.
Brendan, in which world is he going to get 40 or 50 voting against the report? There'll be a lot of abstentions. Moving on quickly, aren't you worried about criticising the Privileged Committee because they're going to do their own special report into MPs like you? You could be found in contempt of Parliament, so you better watch what you say about Harriet Harman and co.
Well, this is the whole point, Camilla. This is why you've had so few people publicly coming out and saying things, really. Now, actually going out and voting is different. A lot of people, including myself, actually waited for that report to come out first before we commented on it. We let the committee do their job. But I think some of the threats to backbenchers have been absolutely disgraceful, really. I mean, it's our job to scrutinise Parliament. It's our job to speak up. There's no point us really being there in Parliament if we're not allowed to do that. And I don't see why any committee or any part of the institution should be above that scrutiny. So, I mean, in terms of the threats for that, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I've waited, I've read the report, I'm going to give my speech, and I will say as I please. And if people want to sanction me for that, then so be it, and I will wear that as a badge of honour.
Brendan, if you do get sanctioned, let us know and we can have you back on GB News to discuss your fate. Thank you very much for joining me on this Sunday morning. Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you, Camilla.
Now, if you're thinking this is a bit of a Tory fest, let's be honest, it's because the weekend is a Tory fest. We've got the Tories in all sorts of trouble, which is why we've had this succession of Tory guests. We are having Anna Sarwar from Labour on to discuss Scottish politics and indeed Nicola Sturgeon in just a moment. But let's join Robert Buckland now, who's the Tory MP for South Swindon. He's a former Justice Secretary. And hello, Robert, lovely to see you. The last time I saw you were singing God Save the King. But now let's have a chat about something rather more serious, because what is your reaction to this extraordinary news that Levi Belfield, of all people, a serial killer of young girls, is now going to be allowed to marry in prison, Robert?
Well, the whole thing, frankly, is macabre. This is a man who committed most heinous crimes, who has been, let's not forget, sentenced to a whole life tariff. That means a whole of his life imprisonment being served behind bars. So the concept of this individual marrying somebody and having married life is, well, frankly, absurd, bearing in mind where he is. He's in a high-security prison where he belongs. And I think there are real questions here about the safety of the woman who says she wishes to marry this man, and indeed the absurdity of a position whereby somebody like this, one of about 60 people kept in whole life tariffs, are able to even contemplate getting married. The theatre of the absurd, Camilla.
Yes. Let's just remind GB viewers and indeed listeners of Belfield's appalling crimes. He's currently serving 2 whole life sentences for the murders of Millie Dowler in 2002, Marsha McDonnell in 2003, and Amélie Delagrange in 2004, as well as the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy in the same year. What on earth can be done to stop this? I also read, Robert, that he's received 30 grand in legal aid.
Yes, I mean, astonishing. There will be times when, for example, if a prisoner perhaps is they got the date of their release wrong, they need some advice and legal help as to get that right. Okay, but this sort of scenario again just beggars belief. It does appear at the moment that the law and the Marriages Act, which governs marriages, does allow this. I don't think, in all good faith, that the people who passed the law 40 or so years ago ever imagined that it would apply in circumstances like this. Quite rightly, the government is taking action to ban marriages and civil partnerships for prisoners on whole life tariffs. The law is before Parliament now, and it will have an effect on current sentences. So if the law can be passed as quickly as possible in the next few months, it may well apply in Belfield's case. I just wonder, Camilla, whether this is an attempt by Belfield once again to be the centre of attention.
Yeah.
This is an evil individual who clearly likes exerting control, particularly on women and vulnerable people. And I just think this is just a continuation of a macabre display by this individual that is deeply unedifying and undermines, understandably, public confidence in the system. It's just a dreadful situation.
So, Robert, I just want to ask you one more question about Colin Pitchfork. Obviously, there's been a lot of reporting of him and now this idea that he's going to be released. Do we think that's a good idea? Obviously responsible for the rape and murder of 2 young women. Pitchfork, should he be among the public? He's still a risk to the public, isn't he?
Well, I last time he was released, I objected strongly and asked the parole board to reconsider. He was released, and guess what? Within a couple of months, he was recalled to prison because he breached his licence conditions. Yes. I am amazed that so shortly after that, it's only about a year or 18 months, here he is being allowed to be released once again. I am very much on the side of the victims' families and indeed the wider community, particularly in the Leicestershire area, in having grave concern about the release of a man who not just murdered twice in horrific circumstances, but breached his licence conditions when he was given that chance only 18 months ago. I don't agree with this at all.
Sir Robert Buckland, thank you for your clarity and candour on these issues. Lovely to speak to you this morning. Now, Ellie Costello is in Leighton Buzzard. She's with the People's Panel there. Ellie, I've spoken to Michael Gove, I've spoken to David Davis. We've done it all this morning. What have the panellists made of my interviews this morning?
Well, Camilla, I must say you've been on fire this morning with your questioning. The panel have very much enjoyed today's programmes. Let's get reaction to them. Michelle, what did you make of the programme so far? What stood out to you?
I mean, it's the investigation on the Privilege Committee, when you've got one of the main accusers now being investigated for his own wife's birthday party, allegedly, so breach of rules. Where's the impartiality in these investigations in many other MPs that are involved in the same thing but have not had the same actions taken against them as Boris?
I mean, but David Davis made a point that we were all talking about, which is, can they actually be impartial? I mean, he was describing Westminster as a village. They all know each other. Is it even possible?
Well, should they not have a neutral body then that does these investigations and not MPs that are going to favour one side or over the other? You know, should there not be a completely neutral body that investigates these things?
OK. We were also talking about resignation honours, weren't we, round the table? We were reacting to that. What do we make of resignation honours?
It's just a sham, really, isn't it? You should stop all these resignation honours.
You don't think we should have them at all?
Oh, we should, but for the general, ordinary public that contribute to their communities, and that they should be thought of first.
And Pat, what stood out to you from Camilla's show this morning?
Well, it's just the matter of the by-elections, all these resignations coming in. I'd like to see, obviously I'm an independent, so I like to see an independent get in mid-beds, and Gareth Mackey, you've got my support. But having said that, I don't believe that Sir Keir Starmer's got the support he thinks he has nationally, because 70 to 80% of voters in the local elections didn't come out to vote. So are they going to stay at home when these by-elections take place? Because everyone seems to be disenfranchised from democracy itself now. They've had enough.
I mean, James, let's bring you in at that point, because Michael Gove was very confident. He said he was confident in victory in all 4 by-elections, but he does have to say that, really, doesn't he?
He does. And we were talking earlier, really, about the sense, the point you just made, which is the sense of being politically homeless, which I think I would describe myself as. And lots, as you were saying, Pat, lots of people aren't going to turn out because they're saying, well, Labour, Conservative, Lib Dems, whatever, all the same. This sense of democracy being slowly whittled away. And one interesting point, I think, for me that came up with Brendan's point just now is he said he was one of the few MPs who was actually willing to publicly say he was kind of backing Boris. Lots of people quietly, but they don't want to say things because it's going to affect their career, affect their standing, that kind of thing. So there's a sort of, for me, he's kind of opened a bit of a can of worms on this whole idea of what can you say in public, freedom of speech. which is now becoming a big deal. A big deal.
So do you look up to Brendan in that sense, that he has been one of the few to come out and speak so publicly?
Well, in the sense that he's been willing to sort of put his head over the parapet, I think so. But there's this broader sort of issue, not just MPs, but I think the public generally, social media, TV, conversations in public. What can you not say? What is allowed to be said? This kind of thing. Can you say I support this without being piled upon? That kind of thing.
We've also been talking about Levi Belfield this morning. He's got married in prison, £30,000 of taxpayers' money. What are your reactions to that?
Well, I think it's shocking. He was jailed for heinous crimes. He shouldn't have £30,000 of public money spent to enable him to marry. He can do what he likes if he's ever released from prison, but should prisoners be entitled to this taxpayers' money? But when they've committed terrible crimes, it's shocking. It's really shocking.
Pat, what do you make of that? Because there will be some people out there who think we live in a civilised society, prisoners still have rights. What do you say to that?
I just think the justice system doesn't serve its purpose for the residents of the whole country. I feel sick to the teeth, actually, that we've got people that do these heinous crimes, and we tend to look after them more than we do the victims and the families that are left behind.
And James, just 10 seconds with you. What do you think about this case?
Yeah, absolutely appalling. I think I agree with Pat on that. This is £30,000 that could be spent on something else, not on Levi Belfield getting married. Insane, absolutely insane.
Yeah, lots of thoughts, lots of opinions around this coffee table today. Camilla, thank you so much for having us on the People's Panel. Back to you.
Ellie, thank you so much. You've had a right old chinwag there. Looks like you've had a great morning, thank you. And if you want to apply for the People's Panel in future, folks, please do go to gbnews.com/panel. Now, naturally, we've got lots more to come on the show. In just a minute, I'm going to be quizzing the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar, about Labour's green agenda. Be back very soon. Don't go anywhere.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel. Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. We're just getting ready to speak to Anna Sarwar, the Scottish Labour MP, MSP for Glasgow rather, but he's the Scottish Labour leader and he's going to talk us through all things SNP as well as Labour in Scotland. But first of all, I'm joined by Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary and GB News presenter, who's here with us from 11. Michael, before I ask you what you've got on the show, what do you think's next for Scotland? There's some intriguing polling in the Sunday Times suggesting that by the end of the decade, the Labour Party could have 26 seats in Scotland, in Westminster.
Yes, I mean, that is, as it were, a modern-day shock. Of course, Labour used to dominate Scotland at Westminster, but recently they have not done so. They've only got one seat, and they could go to 26. According to this opinion poll, they could have more seats at Westminster than the SNP does. And this would obviously be an enormous assistance in getting a majority in the Westminster Parliament. So this is extraordinary news. Anna Sarwar is a very interesting person to interview on this, because, of course, he was part of the Labour wipeout. He used to be a Member of Parliament at Westminster. He lost his seat in 2015. So, as you rightly say, he is now in the Scottish Parliament and leader of the Labour Party in the Scottish Parliament. And he's had his critics along the way. Not too many people have thought that he's made much of an impression. But he's suddenly in this position where he may be riding on the crest of a wave. And very often opinion polls just tell us what people are thinking now. They don't tell us about what's going to happen at the next election. But it's very hard for the SNP, isn't it? Because modern police investigations just drag on forever. So, I mean, if this investigation into the SNP could be done and dusted, that would be one thing. You'd think, well, they might have 18 months to recover. But this case is going to be sort of gaining momentum, if anything, as the general election approaches.
Although it was quite a good week to bury bad news, wasn't it? I mean, at one point, I think the BBC was running on Boris Johnson the very moment that Nicola Sturgeon had been taken in for police questioning. I thought, oh, that's an interesting apportioning of the news agenda.
Agreed. But on the other hand, I don't think you can be Scottish and aware of Scottish politics and not be aware that the SNP is being investigated and that its top officials have been arrested and not charged with anything, but they have been arrested, and there is a question of a lot of money which the police want to know about.
Now, enough about Scottish politics. What have you got coming on the show at 11?
Well, for example, we're looking at the question of what it was like to be gay in the military. A report has been delivered to the government but not yet published, which talks about the trauma that many people went through because they were gay in the military at the time when it was banned, which was not all that long ago. I've got a couple of veterans coming along to talk about their experiences. We're going to be looking at the sort of literature that comes out of Northern Ireland. I mean, that's an interesting place because politics plays such a very high part in its life, and it's produced people like C.S. Lewis and Louis MacNeice and Seamus Heaney. And we're going to be talking to modern writers from Northern Ireland as well. We're going to have some beautiful cakes on the show towards the end.
Should I stay?
Yeah, you definitely should.
Like, if slices going to be handed out?
And oddly enough, we're also talking about there's a bill in Parliament to stop big game hunters bringing their trophies, bringing their heads back to this country. But many people in Africa are saying this is going to make things worse. The poachers are going to kill more animals illegally because the hunting business sustains the conservation of animals. Interesting point.
Fascinating stuff to come then. Stay tuned, and Michael Portillo will be with you at 11. Now, I'm hoping we now have Anna Sarwar, Scottish Labour leader, MSP for Glasgow, joining us down the line from Scotland. Anna, Mr Sarwar, lovely to speak to you. First of all, I know that Labour's announcing the Green Prosperity Plan in Scotland this week. I'm confused about this because obviously we've seen Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves sort of suggests that this 28 billion that had been set aside per year for this project had been watered down. So what's the deal? You've got a green prosperity plan without the planned funding.
Well, I'm happy to give you clarification and reassure you, Camilla, so we take your confusion away. We are really clear that we have a climate emergency, but also a cost of living crisis. And Labour is going to take the strategic decisions to actually realise and maximise the green revolution. That's partly around establishing the Great British Energy Company that's going to make those strategic investments across not just the northeast, where we have a significant oil and gas sector, but also in communities across the country, so communities it can benefit from the green revolution. But it's going to be backed up by a UK Treasury that's there to help make those strategic investments. So what we're not talking about is getting rid of the green prosperity plan. What we're doing is being sensible with the economy, recognising the economic situation we currently have, one that we're likely to inherit, and making sure we have a plan that's deliverable. And our plan is going to be driven by 4 objectives. The first one is more jobs. Second, lower bills. Third, greater energy security. And fourth, climate leadership. There is going to be a global leader on this. We want that global leader to be Scotland and the UK.
We're struggling slightly with the line here, but hopefully you can hear me. Now, I'm also confused, and maybe it's just a morning of confusion for Camilla here, but Starmer has on one hand said that he doesn't want any more drilling in the North Sea, and yet he said that he won't stop Rosebank, which is new drilling in the North Sea. So which is it? Does he want new drilling or doesn't he want new drilling?
So we haven't said that we're going to turn off the tap. We've said the opposite. And I think it's really important that we give that reassurance and clarification. There will be no turning off of the tap. There will be no cliff edge. Oil and gas will play a significant role in our energy sector for decades to come. We're talking about how we work in partnership to deliver those strategic investments, to give confidence to the industry to invest and for us to make sure we're maximising the green revolution. But as part of that reassurance, we're really clear, we are going to respect all existing licences. We will respect and honour all new licences that may be granted between now and the next general election, because it's important that those businesses have the clarity in making those investment decisions over the shorter term, but also because we don't want to open up the government to any kind of claims for compensation. So I don't see any contradiction in that at all.
Well, Keir Starmer has said that you're not going to give any new licences, and now you're indicating that you are. So that's a contradiction.
No, it's not, because we are going to honour existing licences. We're going to honour any new licences that are issued between now and the next general election. But we are not in a place of looking at new licences beyond the next general election. That's a perfectly consistent and reasonable position to take.
So you're going to give new licences until 2024 and then no new ones? There's a contradiction as well, Mr. Sarwar, sorry, in your suggestion about jobs, sorry, just on this job suggestion, because the unions, which we know back the Labour Party, have warned that these plans to not issue new licences after 2024 are going to cost 45,000 jobs.
Well, I think what the unions are rightly concerned about, and what industry has rightly been concerned about, is to say that we've had all these promises before over the last decade, but those promises haven't come to fruition. And that's what I think is really important to emphasise, Camilla. We aren't in government. We aren't making those decisions over the last decade. We aren't making those decisions over the next year. But I hope after the next general election, we are making those decisions. And what we want to indicate is when we are making those decisions, we will not just have the rhetoric and talk a good game of maximising the green revolution. We'll actually deliver it in practice, working in partnership with the industry. Because government can't do this alone. We need the industry to work with us to deliver those strategic investments and maximise.
Yeah. Mr. Sarwar, we are struggling, unfortunately, with the line. I was going to ask you for your reaction to Nicola Sturgeon's arrest. If you can still hear me, but we are struggling a little bit. Quick reaction to Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, look, you've got a party now in meltdown, and we've got a dysfunctional and incompetent SNP government, and that's why people, yes, want change across the UK, but they also want change here in Scotland, and Scottish Labour is now the only change on offer.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning, Mr. Sarwar.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you. We've got a great generation gap coming next. We haven't had one in a couple of weeks, so after the row that followed Boris Johnson's resignation honours and a load more honours announced yesterday for the King's birthday, I'm going to be asking, is it time to scrap the honours system altogether? Stay tuned.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now it's time for the Generation Gap, the part of the show where people from different generations debate hot political topics. This week, should we scrap the honours system? The honours system has been in the news a lot recently, of course, because of Boris Johnson's picks for his resignation offers, which ruffled a few feathers. And yesterday, a number of new knights and dames were announced to celebrate the King's birthday, including, again, a few controversial picks. But does it make sense to have an honours system in the 21st century? To discuss this, I'm joined by Iman Aiton, anti-racism campaigner, and Rafe Hadel-Mancu, GB News' resident royal expert and historian, and he's editor, this is perfect, of Burke's World of Orders and Knighthood and Merit. Burke's World Orders of Knighthood and Merit. Rafe, you're just too qualified for this Gen Gap. It's unreal. Now, let's get straight into it. Should we have the honours system? Iman?
No, not even in the slightest.
Why?
Firstly, it's an opportunity for the monarchy to assert its dominance. Secondly, it reinforces hierarchy and classism, which ultimately trickles down into society.
Although lower-class people do get honours, and indeed people of colours do get honours.
But we know that the catalyst, then in terms of classism, it starts at the root, which is the monarchy and the crown.
OK.
And, of course, it is an obscene display of privilege and power. And last but not least, it represents the empire, an empire that whose aim, rather, was to dominate, subjugate, oppress and exploit. So that is why I do not subscribe to it.
In giving an honour to Mrs Miggins, the dinner lady who's served children at a school for 35 years, it's somehow propping up slavery and the empire.
No, it resonates for you because you subscribe to the British Empire and the monarchy. I'm an anti-royalist, so therefore the whole thing needs to go.
I'm not a royalist, I'm just a realist.
OK,
well,
look,
let's just first put one issue to bed here, and that's the Order of the British Empire. The clue is in the name. It's not exclusively a British honour, it's a Commonwealth honour conferred by 11 other countries, apart from Britain, all of whom are non-white, right? So the majority of the countries are black-majority Caribbean nations. So if the Caribbean nations of Antigua and the Bahamas and Belize and St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Lucia have no problem still conferring the Order of the British Empire, I don't see why we here should need to get our undergarments in a twist over the subject. More broadly, every country in the world, with the exception of Switzerland, has an honours system. We have the gold standard. Ours is the Rolls-Royce Corniche. Because of the antiquity of our honours, it links people today who receive an honour with Churchill, with Florence Nightingale, with Sir Isaac Newton. And, of course, we have very few honours. We grant 3,000 honours a year, which is a paltry number compared to, say, the 20,000 that are given in Italy. France, the Légion d'honneur, there are more conferrals of that than all of our orders combined. So because of the rarity of it, we don't actually use up the allocation we have every year because we want to make sure that the right people get them. And the majority, let me just finish this point, sorry. The majority of awards go to the unsung heroes of Britain, people who make up the backbone of this country through volunteering, charity work and community initiatives. It's a chance to celebrate them, and by celebrating them, give them that honour and that recognition they wouldn't get otherwise, and inspire
Iman,
others.
I'm going to bring you back in, but I'm going to say to Rafe, OK, you've made that point, but let's look at some of the people that have been honoured in recent days. We've got Ben Mallet and Sean Bailey. Ben Mallet's been filmed today by the Sunday Mirror at a lockdown party at CCHQ in honour of Sean Bailey, who wasn't actually there, but fair enough. We've also got, for instance, Mark Thompson, the former Director General of the BBC, who said there shouldn't be an investigation into Jimmy Savile.
Oh, wow.
We've got Alton Towers boss Nick Varney, who told the victims of that crash where they lost their legs, this crash has cost this firm a lot of money.
That gets even worse.
We've got Charlotte Owen being ennobled. This is somebody who served, we think, as an executive assistant to Boris Johnson for a matter of months, now at 29 in the House of Lords.
I think that's absolutely indefensible. It's important we also understand what we're talking about, because viewers can get confused. We have the Prime Minister's controversial resignation honours list,
which
I would absolutely have that reviewed and amended, and if need be, abolished. I don't see why we can't have a scrutiny committee review Prime Ministerial resignation honours in the same way that other honours are rewarded. So in 2004, Sir Hayden Phillips did a major review of the honour system. So our main honour system has independent committees with the majority of independent people on them, chaired by independent leaders, business, science, health, education, volunteerism, and that is our Rolls-Royce Corniche. The resignation honour system is run by convention, and unfortunately today's politicians don't abide by the same gentlemanly rules, as we can see with cabinet ministers never resigning when they should. And I think there is actually an argument to be made, certainly for resignation honours to be looked at.
All right, so some common ground there. Iman, I think Rafe makes a good point about the fact that the vast majority of people who appear on the honours list, and I look at it, it gets sent to me when the investitures come out, and I see all of these people that have done lots of different things. It's largely a tool with which you can reward people for giving their time as volunteers, of members of charities, of people who genuinely have served their communities, might not get paid a lot of money for it, but actually are recognised by having letters after their name.
I appreciate everything you've just said because, again, you subscribe to an extent to the monarchy. Firstly, just to touch on the point that you made in terms of the Commonwealth, well, let's just be clear. The Commonwealth is a perpetuation of the British Empire. Like I said, an empire that had the agenda, sole agenda, of dominating, subjecting people and etc.
In your view.
Right? No, it's just based on history.
Not really,
so
not your history.
It's a continuation.
Your truth, perhaps, but not most people's truth.
Hold on a second. So I would argue that in terms of the Commonwealth, because you spoke about that in terms of this conversation, it's really important to just make this note. I believe that the Commonwealth is a regressive manoeuvre that is disguised as progress. I believe it is an exploitative venture disguised as a mutually beneficial exchange. And like I said, it's the continuation of the British Empire. But ultimately, the golden thread, like I said, is being able to assert dominance, right? So being able to assert dominance on black people.
So what do you think of black people who have accepted honours? Should they not have done it?
I personally would not have, like I said.
I know,
for all
but
of
what
the
do you think?
reasons.
Lots of black people and people of colour accept honours. They're offered honours. Should they recuse themselves from receiving these honours?
That's completely up to them. For me personally, I wouldn't. I wouldn't accept an honour.
And so what do you say to Antigua and Barbuda and Barbados instituted their own knighthoods conferred by the king now of Antigua and Barbuda before the Queen of Barbados when she was queen? So these are black countries instituting their own indigenous honours with knighthoods that come from their crown, from the monarch, because the monarch is apolitical. The fons honorum, the fount of all honour, is removed from the political frame, removed from the controversies of Boris Johnson's list, and is able to actually represent the nation, thanking you for a job well done.
And I think it's because the British Empire rather has decided, or Britain has decided, that they are the arbiters of equality and human rights, and therefore they can bestow this honour on all different types of people, including those black people that they subjugated, oppressed and exploited over 400 years ago, continue to racially abuse their descendants 400 years later. So that is the irony. We can talk about the fact that the Commonwealth is involved, but let's just talk about surveys. I know you're a facts man, I'll give you a quick fact.
Please
the
do.
National UK Survey, the UK National Equality Survey, rather, stated that 49% of black Caribbeans, 35% of black Africans and 61% of black other, including black British, have all experienced racial assault, which supersedes the Gypsy and Traveller stats that were in the newspapers a few weeks ago.
I'm running out of time.
Moral
quick response,
point of the tale is basically these institutions are ultimately exploiting
really
black
quickly,
people.
Rafe,
They've been doing it for a very long time. This is why
It would be lovely to have a discussion where race isn't shoehorned into everything. We now know from survey after survey that the world's three top nations for
white flag.
Sorry, apologies.
Thank you for joining me today. I'll be back at 9:30. Stay tuned for Michael Portillo.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and